Welcome to the third lecture on pre-weaning calf management. As you may recall, we started with calving management and then we did neonatal calf management and we moved on to pre-weaning calf management where we mainly talked about feeding. So be doing my last lecture on pre-weaning calf management next week, which will be on housing, right? So that will be pre-weaning calf management number 4, right? Then we move on to weaning, heifer calf management, which is post-weaning calf management, then adult animal management, lactating, dry cow, transition cow, so on, right? So we have so far talked about colostrum feeding in detail, the quantities, when, how much to give, frequency, which route, the physiological importance, the nutritive values, the immune function, different types of placentation, etc., etc. Right? Then we also talked about certain aspects of concentrate feeding, which is calf starter, right? Uh, the physiology behind that, why we should feed concentrates, different volatile fatty acids, what part of rumen development it helps, and so on, right? And then we also talked about, a very important part of all of pre-weaning management is ensuring pre-ruminant to ruminant transition. So we spent quite a lot of time talking about that as well, right? So with regard to this transition from pre-ruminant to ruminant, we talked about, 4 aspects, right? Rumen papillary development, then, establishment of microbes, development of muscular tissue, papillary integrity, right? So I went into details about this papillary development, when it starts, and so on, the volatile fatty acids that affect that, right? And then today we'll talk about establishment of microbes a little bit in detail. I won't spend a lot of time on muscular tissue or development or volume expansion because it's simply a function of, substrate, right? With time, it takes place gradually, but of course, it won't take place if you don't provide enough substrate, right? Which is essentially roughage, right? So this is not something that will, complete prior to weaning, right? So this is mainly something that happens afterwards because that's when you introduce a lot of substrate quantity. So as far as papillary integrity goes, this is like, if you don't provide diet, abrasiveness, papilla tend to clump together, right? And this keratin produced won't get sloughed off, right? So for the keratin to get naturally sloughed off, removed, right, there has to be abrasiveness or rough diet, right? So we'll talk about establishment of microbes. Where do they get microbes from, right? So if they are uh, born under hygienic conditions and separated from the mother and all that, just like we mentioned, they shouldn't have any microbes by the time at the time of birth, right? So they will gradually establish this, right? So this is not something that can happen all of a sudden, right? It's a time taking process that takes place slowly, right? But what's important here is, animal to animal contact is important, right? Now bacteria will get, into the system, from, the forages, from, housing, all that, utensils, and all that, right? But for protozoa, right, you generally need animal to animal contact, right? So initially, animal to animal contact is very limited. You have not done housing yet, but initially we keep them in individual pens, right? So microbes can get introduced basically through animal to animal contact from the environment, like I said, feed sources, housing, bedding, utensils, etc. And then, we have to make sure that there is a favorable environment for microbial microfloral establishment, right? So what we mean by favorable environment is, you know, the optimum pH and temperature, of course, you know, they are obviously going to be there. So what you and I can do is we have to ensure that there is, you know, a fluid environment, right? I mean, so where are these microbes going to stay? Suspended in free air, or are they going to attach to the rumen mucosal wall, papilla, or are they going to float in fluid, or are they going to attach to substrate? What are substrate? Substrate would be basically roughage and, you know, concentrate, roughage or concentrates, right? So you have to have a surface or a substrate for these microbes to attach to, right? So this is where we can expedite this process by providing proper substrates, and also by facilitating, you know, sufficient fluid environment by giving sufficient amounts of water. And then, of course, you know, if we control the diet properly, you know, you'll get the optimal pH and rumen temperature, right? Okay. So far we have talked about colostrum feeding. We have briefly talked about milk feeding also. There's not a lot, you know, I'll be talking about that today. And then concentrates also we talked about, you know, how to introduce, what do we expect, we expect it to gradually increase, and amount of concentrate the animal should be eating by the time of weaning, and so on. We talked about. So today we'll be talking about basically milk, water, and roughages, right? So one of the misconceptions by certain farmers of countries like Sri Lanka is that they think, okay, the calf is supposed to drink only milk, not water, right? And some people think, okay, you know, if it drinks plenty of milk, why it doesn't need any water. Of course, if they keep the calf with the mother, then of course the calf will have access to the mother's water, right? But sometimes I've seen even in large farms, you know, there is no fresh water. So free choice or ad libitum water is, there is water available all the time. It's not like you give 2 liters in the morning and 2 liters in the evening. There is fresh water, right? So the important phrase there is fresh. It can't be 3 days old water. Say a farmer loads, there's a big barrel, he loads that barrel once a week, right? But again, there is still water available for the calf anytime, but that's not good enough because that's not fresh water, right? So animals, dogs, cats, cattle, you know, they are reluctant to drink you know, stale or old, you know, non-fresh water or feed, right? So having water available is not good enough. You have to have fresh water continuously available, right? So that's what we mean by free choice or ad libitum water availability. So these are a small study, right, done in 1984. See if you can interpret that, you know, pause the video for a minute and see if you can interpret that. Okay, welcome back. I hope you did pause the video. If you haven't done, please do pause and think, but try to interpret what this experiment means before I spell it out. And so basically, these are two experiment done using two groups of calves. So this black group, they gave ad libitum water, unlimited. The gray group, they gave no water, right? No water at all, which means the calves only source of fluid was milk, right? So when they looked at the average daily gain, body weight gain, average daily gain, uh, you know, was high in the group that received free choice water compared to the group that did not get water. And then calf starter consumption, which is extremely important for the animal's development as well as the rumen development, was also higher in this group where there was ad libitum water given compared to this group where they received no water. and you should know this word by now. Scour days is, the number of days that calves had diarrhea or loose stools. Again, that was lower in the group that received more water compared to the group that received less water. So this is also a misconception certain farmers have. They say, sir, when we give more water, the calf develops diarrhea. Now you can obviously see that is not the case here, right? Okay. So basically, what this experiment, from 2001 shows is that the effect of water consumption of calf starter intake, right? So the more water the calf drinks, the more calf starter the calf consumes, right? So even up to uh, 3 kilos here, right? So why is that? Because you know um, calf start is dry feed, right? So if the animal thinks, feels the physiology, feels okay, I don't have enough water in the system, the calf won't eat calf starter, right? So that's why the more water you give, the more calf starter the calf will eat, and as a result, the higher the body weight gain on a daily basis, as well as if you take the whole pre-weaning period as a whole. So remember, when you give more water, they will eat more concentrates. They will develop the rumen papilla faster, and of course, which will have plenty of benefits to the calf overall, right? So, as a veterinarian or a future veterinarian, you have to have an idea about the volume of water a calf consumes, right? If a farmer asks you, the easy way out would be to say you have to have fresh water throughout the day. Make sure there's fresh water throughout the day, right? But you see that might not be a problem. So let's say the calf drinks 5 liters, is expected to drink 5 liters, right? But because you don't tell 5 liters, you say as much water as possible, the farmer, let's say, fills up a half a barrel, which with, let's say, 50 liters, right? So for certain farmers, 50 liters versus 5 liters may not make a difference, but in a certain area, the farmer might have to carry the water, 500 meters or 100 meters from the well or whatever. So it's not fair, right? So you have to have an idea about the kind of volume a calf needs, right? So basically, I also don't remember the exact figure, 7.5, 5.6, etc. So what I remember is like, a 1 month old calf will drink about 5 liters, right? And that increases to about 10 liters by 3 months, right? As long as you have, so if any farmer asks you, so how much water should I, so, or madam, how much water should I leave for my calf, you can easily say 10 liters. 10 liters is, this animal doesn't drink 10 liters. So if you can leave 10 liters, but don't load the whole 10 liters in the morning, just break it down to three of 2 to 3 times a day. Give 3 liters in the morning, another three during midday, and another three in the evening, so that should keep it fresh, right? So you have to have an idea about these figures, right? So that if somebody asks, you can give them proper advice. And when they start milking, this formula changes, right? So then we have to calculate water based on maintenance as well as milk production, right? So we generally say for every liter of milk a cow needs to drink 4 to 5 liters of water, right? For every liter of milk a cow produces. So we need to add that on top of the maintenance requirement, but we'll go into details when we talk about the about feeding of the lactating animal. Right, so that's it for water, right? Then what about roughages? Now, if you recall previous lecture, one of the previous lectures, we said you should not feed calves hay, right? We looked at this experiment from Pennsylvania State University where they gave, milk only, milk and hay, and milk and grain or concentrates, and hay did not do any good to the rumen development, and another experiment that compared 0% hay versus 2% versus 4% hay, right? And then 0% had the best growth parameters, starter intake, body weight gain, feed conversion ratio, etc., etc. So as such, we said, this further confirmed the notion of that we should not feed hay to calves. So does it mean that we don't feed any roughages at all to calves? Actually, but we do. We do give roughages starting as early as day 4, but that is not hay, right? So you need to know, when do we introduce roughages to a calf, what type of roughages are given, and what is the justification behind that. Why do calves need roughages when these experiments clearly show that at least hay is not good, right? So we will talk about that in detail a little. So these are some photographs I took from Australia. I made these photographs in Australia, and see, these are calves eating. Can you guess what? Right, so there are two things actually here. One is the pelleted concentrate calf starter. The other, can see, is actually, this is not hay or fresh grass or immature grass. Yeah, this is straw, right? Of course, in Sri Lanka, straw would be rice straw, right? But in other countries, it may not be rice straw, it may be wheat straw, barley straw, etc. Right? So you can see the straw has been chopped, right? So you don't always get a consistent length when you chop fodder, grasses, right, or straw, right? So you still have about 1 inch particles, right? And then you have smaller particles, right? So you probably don't want them more than 1.5 to 2 inches, right? So generally you want the bulk of it to be about half an inch to 1 inch, right? Especially for this group of calves, you don't want them too large, you don't want them too small either. So you see, so one idea is that you mix them together, right? So why not provide them two different um, you know troughs, one trough or one bucket filled with calf starter, other bucket filled with roughages, right? So they haven't done that here. What they have done instead is they have mixed them together. So what's the idea behind mixing them together? What do you think? Right, so you will learn of a feeding technique called TMR, total mixed ration, in the future if you have not already heard of it, right? So so that they are also total mixed ration, right? So we mix feed together. So you could give them separately also, right? You could give the concentrate, the forages, mineral mixture, the vitamins. You can give them separately, but instead we choose to mix them together. Why do we do that? So there are different reasons which you learn as we go along, right? But for now, remember, one of the main ideas here is that when you mix them together, calves cannot separate them and eat, right? Now, say calves may have a preference for either calf starter or straw here. One of them, right, is preferred over the other. So if you give two separate buckets, they will eat the one that they like better, the one that tastes better, right? So they will eat one and not the other, right? But that's not what we want. We want them to eat both in the proper ratio recommended by a nutritionist or whatever, right? So that's why we mix them. So when you mix them, calf automatically has no option but to eat both of them, because they cannot their prehensile pattern is such that they cannot separate the two ingredients from each other. Okay, so that is very important to understand the logic behind mixing them together, right? So you have to mix them together. So I did mention that this is straw, right? But exact ratios we will talk about here. Okay, right. So basically now we have talked about you know, the different ingredients that are fed to a calf, right, during the pre-weaning period. We start with colostrum, then it's milk or transitional milk. Then we introduce, you know, of course, even on day one, we introduce water, and then we go on to introduce calf starter and roughages at one point, right? So those are the five things that calves consume: colostrum, milk, water, then the solids, which are roughages and concentrates. So this particular timeline assumes that calves are weaned at day 56, which is like 8 weeks, 7 times 8, 56, right? But that is not a rule set in stone, right? So we will talk about that in the future lectures. But for now, just remember it's day 56. Huh? For the purpose of this, we are going to assume calves are going to be weaned on day 56, but that is not a constant, right? It can change. Okay, right. So this particular regime, so if you didn't understand, or if you didn't bother paying attention to any of my previous lecture notes on calf feeding, this is the slide that you have to pay attention to, right? So you can still be a successful calf manager if you knew what's calf manager in terms of feeding, if you knew everything, if you practiced everything on this slide alone, right? So this we call an intensified calf feeding program, right? So this is not just any calf feeding this is an intensified calf feeding program geared for commercial calf management production, for early weaning, to expedite rumen development, to expedite calf development, and so on, right? Okay, so of course we start on day one, right? So we mentioned that on day one we have to give 20% of the body weight, which is the birth weight, right, on that particular day, right? So we give the first 10% as soon as possible, preferably within half an hour, right, of birth, and then we follow it up with another 10% of body weight in about 12 hours, right? So if the calf was 40 kilograms at birth, we give 10%, which is 4 liters within half an hour. Then we follow with another 4 liters 1 hour later, right? And of course, the calf may not drink any water today because you're going to keep the water in a bucket to start with, right? And we already talked about that calves cannot drink from a bucket at this stage, right? So if the animal has consumed 20% of the body weight, right, 8 liters, you don't want to give it any more fluid, but anyway, you leave a bucket in front of the calf so that the calf gets used to the water, the bucket, two buckets being in front of the calf, all that, right? But you don't expect for the calf to drink water this day because it has already drunken 8 liters of fluid in terms of milk, right? However, you do want to give a bucket of water on day one. On day 2 and 3, right, in the natural scenario, we call this transition milk, right? So if you go back to, if you can recall that slide I did on, the composition of milk from first milking, which is colostrum, second milking, third milking, so on. Remember, second and third milking have not turned into mature milk yet, right? So their composition is something in between that of colostrum and that of milk, right? So that's why we call it transition milk. So for example, in milk we usually say total solids is like 13%, but in colostrum it was 24%, right? In transition milk from day 2, you can expect total solids to be neither 24% or to 13%, but in between 17%, 15%. So it will gradually come down to 13%, right? So not just total solids, the proteins, lactose, IgG, right? All of these are in transition phase, returning to uh, the levels in milk, right? So that is what you should be giving on day 2 or day 3, um, the actual milk from the mother or stored transition milk. But in large farms, they commercial farms, they may give milk replacer, right? Also, of course, the milk replacer may not have the transitional properties, certain properties of the transition milk, like high immunoglobulins and all that, right? So we call this CMR, right, or milk replacer. Um, and look at the dose now. So on day 1, we gave 20% of body weight or birth weight, right? But on day 2 onwards, we halve that, and now we give 5% of the body weight twice a day, right? So remember, now this is not body weight, right? So on day 1, 2, 3, body weight and birth weight are probably not very different, the same, right? But from day 4 onwards, right, we do not increase milk consumption of the calf by body weight, but instead we do this calculation by birth weight. So if the calf was 40 kilograms at birth and the calf is 70 kilograms here, we still calculate by birth weight, not body weight, right? So here 20% of the birth weight on day 1, day 2 onwards, 10% of the birth weight, right? Which is 5% twice a day. So if it was a 40 kilogram calf, here we gave 8 liters, which is 2 doses of 4 liters each. But from day 2 onwards, that will be a total of 4 liters for a 40 kilogram calf, given in 2 doses of 2 liters each, right? So 5% twice a day, and again you leave a bucket of water, right? Hopefully the calf drinks, right? But it may not drink, but even if it doesn't drink, you can try to make it drink the water, teach it to drink from the bucket, no harm, right? But don't stress the calf too much at this stage, because it's an extremely young animal. Imagine our own children, human babies, we will care for them like a flower during these first few days, right? So the calf may get up, walk, right, unlike a human baby. But even though the calf gets up and walks, just remember that this is still a very young, immature, delicate baby, infant, and you need to take maximum care of it, minimize stresses, and all that good stuff, right? Okay, so on day 1, colostrum and milk. On day 2 to 3, transition milk and water, right? And then from day 4 onwards, you do a couple of additions, right? So on day uh, 4, you add straw and calf starter, right? So milk, same thing as day 2 and 3. 10% of birth weight. See, notice birth weight, not body weight, right? Which is 5% twice a day. And so starting from day 4, you do that throughout, and maybe during the last week or so, you, depending on the farm system, you can decide to gradually reduce this volume. So maybe, so if you give 5% bid, you make it 3% bid for 3 days, right? And then you make it 2% bid. Let's say you're giving, so right now 40 kilogram calf, you're giving 2 liters, right? Bid, right? So either you can make it 1 liter bid, or you can make it, so first you make it 2 liters once a day, right? Or you can make it 1 liter twice a day, and then do 1 liter once a day, right? So you can play around with that, right? So the only reason you do that gradually is because to minimize the stress at weaning, right? Otherwise, the calf is expecting 2 liters of milk, morning and evening, right? And suddenly, for 55 days, I have received all this, and suddenly 56 days, I'm receiving nothing, right? So that can be a stress to the animal. So that's why we advise to gradually reduce during the last week or so, so that calf is already adapted to that, from twice a day to once a day, lower quantity, and then calf, to compensate for that, calf also starts to increase calf starter consumption, right? So that's why we give this transition or buffer period is recommended. Right. So calf starter, like I showed in the chart last week, right? Last lecture. We the calf will eat only a small quantity at the beginning, maybe 30 grams, but it gradually increases, and by the time of weaning, the calf should be eating 1 kilogram, right? So we say 1 kilogram, but here I've said, even up to 750 grams, right? That is because some of our calves are not the 40 kilogram calves, right? So textbook says ideally 1 kilogram, and in certain farming systems, they are eating very close to or even above 2 kilos by the time of weaning, right? But in our scenario, we should, because our farmers are, cost conscious and it's not available and all that, we should aim for at least 750 grams for a smaller Holstein Friesian. Sometimes we see these crosses, Friesian crosses, right? 25 kilos, 22 kilos, 28 kilos, right? So those animals you may not be able to reach 1 kilogram by the time of weaning, right? But generally this is your goal, right? 1 kilogram by the time of weaning, right? um, so remember, crude protein should be at least 18%, right? But if they are, they have, fast growing calves, they have high body weight gains, then you should consider a calf starter as much as 20% or even 22%, certain farms are giving, if the calf growth is high. Right, so calf starter, like we said, is something you introduce on day 4, right? And then it will gradually increase towards a kilo or more by the time of weaning, right? So straw is also something you introduce on day 4 together with this, right? So why straw and not hay or not fresh grass? Think about that for a minute. Hmm? What do you think is different between hay, pasture versus straw? Is straw more nutritious? Is straw more palatable? Do you think calves will prefer straw or fresh grass? Uh, so preference, palatability, nutritive value, all of these are higher in pasture or hay versus straw, right? Yet we recommend to give straw. In Sinhala we say නෝන කැමිව්වම අපි කියනවා නේද අයියෝ අද නම් පිදුරු වගේ කියලා. So that a compliment? No, that is not a compliment, right? So that is a complaint. When we say it tastes like straw, means it doesn't taste good, it has no nutritive value. I don't like it, right? So, but yet we insist on feeding straw instead of pasture. So why do you think that is? Right? So that is because the goal of feeding straw is not to provide nutrients, not to provide carbohydrate. The goal is not to use straw as a source of amino acids or fatty acids, right? That is not the goal. The goal of feeding straw is to provide substrate for microbial attachment, is to provide substrate for rumen expansion, is to provide substrate, for to maintain the rumen pH, right? To stimulate salivation, right? So salivation requires, rough particles inside the rumen, and when chewing, right, salivation stimulated, right? So this saliva comes and play a buffering action, pH regulation, right? So those are the goals of making animals, calves eat straw, right? We are not giving straw as a source of nutrition here, right? So that needs to be understood, right? So that is why we are giving straw. So why not give hay or pasture? This would still take place, right? Pasture can provide a substrate for microbial attachment. Pasture can provide substrate for rumen expansion, bulking up the rumen, right? Pasture can provide stimulation for salivary secretion. The other one I forgot to mention is, they also provide that abrasiveness to prevent clumping of papillae, right? So these four reasons, right? So pasture can also do that, but then why do we give straw, right? We give straw because if we give pasture, because the animal likes it, because it's a natural feed for the animals, they will keep on eating it. They will continue eating it until they are full. And so what happens when they are full? They are not getting a lot of energy from the pasture, right? They are not getting a lot of carbohydrates, easily digestible carbohydrates, which are essential for papillary development. Butyrate producing carbohydrates are little, right, in pasture. So they will eat the pasture, but they will not eat calf starter, right? Stomach will get filled up soon with pasture. So when they do that, they won't have room for calf starter, and therefore they won't develop their ruminal papilla, the rest of the rumen development, in a speedy fashion like we want in the commercial calf production. Okay, so those are the reasons why we recommend to give straw instead of pasture, right? So that needs to be understood. I ask this almost every year from undergraduate and postgraduate exams, right? Small percentage, a very small percentage gives me the complete answer, right? A lot of people get this wrong, completely wrong, and those who do give me an answer, correct answer, uh, I don't get these four things that I mentioned, right? I don't get a complete answer. And of course you need to give water ad libitum, right? So not sure if I mentioned this, right? So like I said earlier, we calculate the milk dose by birth weight, not body weight, right? So if we calculate 10%, that used to be the traditional practice, right? People used to increase volume of milk, quantity of milk fed as the body weight increased, right? But we don't do that. We don't recommend that, simply because if the calf drinks milk and stomach gets full, right, it won't have an appetite for calf starter. So we have clearly shown that it is not the milk but the calf starter that stimulates rumen development, right? So by giving milk, we don't gain much, so that's why we stick to we stick do this calculation by birth weight, right? So the animal at 40 kilograms and at 70-80 kilograms, it still gets that 4 liters as a calculation from the birth weight, right? So remember that. Okay, and then we will talk about weaning in detail, right? So when it comes to weaning, when it gets close to weaning time, we typically recommend gradually weaning off the milk, but some farms still practice abrupt weaning, right? But abrupt anything is not recommended in farming, right? Whether pet animals or livestock, poultry, horses, right? Changes in feeding, housing, all these need to be done gradually, right? And weaning is no exception. Stopping milk, right? Changing housing, changing calf starter, changing type of roughage. All these need to be done gradually, right? So I'll go into details on that when we talk about weaning, right? So we introduce immature forages or hay, right? Fresh or hay, right? After weaning, right? So that happens after weaning, this phase, not at weaning. And of course, you know, water ad libitum, don't forget that, regardless, during all stages, right? So like I said before, if you practice everything on this slide properly, you will have fantastic returns from the calf, right? Provided you maintain all the health and housing aspects well, right? As far as feeding goes, this is all you need to know, right? If you practice this, you can do wonders, whether it's a small scale farm, medium scale farm, or even if you go to Almarai, largest farms in the world, this is the fundamental of everything they do, right? Because there are other little things like, they could add, different supplements, uh, medical management and all that, but other than that, feeding wise, this is all you need to know at this level, right? Okay, right, let's move on to the next slide, right? So this shows a comparison of an intensified feeding management experiment and control feeding. Control is, the traditional feed, conventional feeding, right? So they have done two trials. So on the first trial, 3 or 5 day milk, right, is, higher with intensified feeding. So remember, this intensified feeding is pre-weaning calf management, right? So when they compare the lactation records, first lactation, right, of calves that were given an intensified feeding management, they produced more milk than the control group or conventional group, right? Trial 2, not so much, right? But still they produce more. I don't want to spend too much time on this, right? Because some of you may not have done statistics yet, right? In undergraduate classes, especially. So so here it says, diet is significant. A, trial. B, trial is significant. So that means there has been a difference between the trials as well. Trial 1 and 2 were different for some other reasons, right? But diet is also different, right? So meaning diet is responsible for this difference, right? Diet has an association with this difference. The difference being intensified calf feeding management, which I talked about here, versus conventional calf feeding. So protein, milk protein is not different by diet. See, diet would have been A, but here it says only B, right? So protein content trial is different. For some reason, the two trials were different, but not different by diet. And for fat also not different, right? So this is important, right? So when you look at the numbers say, okay, 858 is higher than 811. So you might think, oh wow, so intensified calf feeding increases milk fat during the first lactation. No, but that is not correct. That is only a numerical observation, right? So if we can make judgments by numerical observations, statistics wouldn't exist, right? So we do statistical analysis to find out if there is an actual association of the treatment group versus the control group. So basically the take home message I want you to take from here is that um, intensified calf feeding increases total volume of milk, right, but not milk fat or milk protein, right, which means it has no effect on changing the composition of milk, right? It can improve the quantity of milk, but it doesn't change the composition of milk. I mean, that's understood, right? So milk is milk, right? You can't change the composition of milk, right? Just unless you change the ratios of the feed during lactation, right? But larger volume of milk means higher development of the animal as a whole, the udder, uh, and so on, right? Okay, right. So this shows the lactation impact on the lactation length, right? So this group A, lactation length is A, which means diet, right? Diet and trial were different. So diet definitely was had an influence on the lactation length, right? So this way it's longer, right? Trial was also different, but trial could be different due to many reasons. I mean, I don't remember the paper. If I remember, read the paper, maybe it will talk about two trials being done in two different farms, right? Then obviously, um, you know, you're going to get different data, right? But within the trial, diet had an influence on changing lactation length, right? So remember what we saw on the first one is 3 or 5 day milk, right? So I'll talk about that in the future, right? So different animals will lactate different lengths depending on management, depending on when they get pregnant, depending on the nutrition level and so on. But for us to be able to compare different animals that lactate at different lengths of time, we talk about something called the 3 or 5 2x twice a day milk equivalent, right? So 305 is also made by in a under perfect conditions. An animal 365-day calendar year, animal should produce 305 days of milk plus 60 days of dry period, right? So that is also how this comes. But in reality, you don't have such a thing in reality. Cows don't get dried off exactly on 3 or 5 days, right? It depends on other factors. The majority of cows don't, right? There might be a few ones, right? But generally, this is only a theoretical calculation you do. In reality, cows will lactate for 280 days, 390 days, 350 days, 320 days. Some animals that get let's say mastitis and dried off, may lactate only 200 days, right, or 150 days, but still you can do a calculation and estimate the 305 2x me, right, which will go into detail. So right, so not only the 305-day milk, but even the actual milk produced. See, 305 milk is 23,000 and 20,000. Actual milk is 28,000 and 24,000 because they lactated a longer period, right? So during 305 days, so this was the actual milk they gave, right, during a lactation length. But when you correct it for 305 days, this is what they gave, 23,000 and 20,000 versus 28,000 and 24,000, right? So we'll talk about that more when we go into 305 2x me, right? And then, so although milk composition was unaffected, see, fat and protein was not affected by the diet, right? Fat corrected milk was positively affected by the diet, right? So what is fat corrected milk, right? So that is um, you know okay, so here so let's say they produced 24,000 liters of milk, right? And let's say 3% was fat. Let's say fat concentration was consistent, right? So 3% of 24,000, fat should be higher than that, but I'm just saying 3% for the sake of calculation, right? So 3% of 24,000 was fat, which will be about what, let's say assuming this is 25,000, right? 1% would be 250. So 750 kilograms of fat, right? For 3% fat, 25,000 kilograms. If it's kilograms, these are pounds, right? And here 20, let's say for ease of calculation, 30,000, right? 30,000, 3% of 30,000 is 900, right? So our total fat, right? Our total fat was higher here. So although the milk composition 3% didn't change, 3% fat was the same for control and intensified group, but if you take the total fat, right, 750 kilograms here, 900 kilograms here, right? So one of the major criterias of uh, valuation of milk, right, pricing of farm gate milk is based on fat percentage, right? So we calculate something called fat corrected milk, right? So when the fat corrected milk was calculated, right, obviously this gives more milk, right? Because of that calculation I told you about. It's not exactly the total fat, right? But I don't want to go into details about fat corrected milk, but so that's what you get, right? So total fat is high here, which means the dollars or rupees you get is much higher for intensified feeding, right? So this is, other than the immediate benefits of intensified calf feeding, which are better rumen development, rumen papillary development, early weaning, better calf growth. Other than that, so these are the long-term benefits of intensified pre-weaning calf management, right? You get more milk, you get more value for your milk, and you get cows lactating longer period, right? I hope that is very clear, and I hope, after seeing these lectures, you will practice intensified calf management in your respective ranges, right? Regardless of whether it's a small animal, small scale, medium scale, or large scale, try to adopt this intensive calf feeding management in your range. Okay. Right. So we talked about, milk being constant, right? Because from birth weight. And then we talked about, giving sufficient consent ad libitum, making sure there's ad libitum concentrates for calves to feed on, right? So that, they have whatever amount they want, right? But then, how do you know my calf is eating enough concentrates, right? So do you just put ad libitum and whatever the calf eats, and you're content? You're okay. I don't know if the calf eats sufficient recommended amounts for the age, right? But hey, I mean, I do my job. I give ad libitum, and it eats. So I assume it's getting enough. Is that good enough, right? So ideally you have to be able to calculate the concentrate and milk, right, based on the calf's body weight and growth rate, right? So it is obvious that a 2-week-old 30-kilogram calf will eat less than a 4-week-old 40-kilogram calf, right? But what if one calf is growing faster and the other one is growing slower, right? So do they eat the same quantity or not? No, they probably won't, right? So they will eat this group growing at 600 grams per day will eat more than this group eating 400 grams per day, right? So how do we calculate that, right? Okay, so to do that, you need to know these figures, calf energy requirements, right? So there's a chart, right? I got from this source, right? So calfnotes.com is highly recommended, guys, regardless of which area of management, calf management you are looking at. they have very reliable, up-to-date information, right? So I got this from them. Actually, their table was on using um, calories, right? Megacalories, but I converted into megajoules because that's what we use in Sri Lanka generally, right? So this column shows different body weights of carbs. This column shows different growth rates, right? So 30 kilogram calf growing at 200 grams per day, 30 kilogram calves gaining 400 grams per day, and so on, right? And when it comes to 40 kilograms and above, some of them can be gaining as much as 600 or even more, right? So these are the numbers for maintenance. Metabolizable energy for maintenance, metabolizable energy for growth or gain. And so there are formulas to calculate that. Metabolizable energy for maintenance, megajoules, equals 0.75 power of body weight times zero point 0.1 or divided by 10 and times 4.184 to calculate to convert megacalories to megajoules, right? So if you do this calculation only, you will get your answer in megacalories. But if you want to convert it into megajoules, you have to multiply by 4.184, right? So basically, 1 megacalorie or 1 calorie is 4.184 joules, right? And ME growth or weight gain is calculated using this formula, right? 0.84 times body weight to the power of 0.355 times average daily gain in kilograms, not in grams. So this is in grams, in kilograms, to the power of 1.2 times 4.184 to convert to megajoules, right? So if you know the body weight and the average daily gain, you can calculate this and these two columns for any calf, any age, any body weight, right? Any body weight gain, right? So these are just some set values, but depending on the farm, depending on the age, depending on the weight, depending on the gain, using these two formulas, you will have to calculate at your farm to get these values, right? So you may not have done any of these energy requirements at this stage. I'm not a nutritionist, right? I have a very basic knowledge in these nutrition calculations and all that, right? But from my basic knowledge is more than enough, in the context of Sri Lankan small and medium and even large scale farming, right? But you need to get that as well, right? So we talk about four different levels of energy: gross energy, digestible energy, metabolizable energy, and net energy, right? So I want you to read up on this, look up on the internet. So gross energy is the total energy in any given feed, right? So if you do laboratory testing, let's say I'm just giving very hypothetical values, they are incorrect, inaccurate, but just for just figures, right? Let's say you take 1 kilogram of 1 kilogram dry matter of prima concentrate feed, cattle feed, and you subject it to bomb calorimeter, laboratory testing, and you look at the energy. Gross energy might be 20 megajoules per kilogram of dry matter, right? But when it gets digested in the gut, not all 20 is absorbed, right? Maybe only 16 gets absorbed, right? So 4 megajoules get lost in the feces, right? So now gross energy was 20, but 4 lost in the feces, right? Didn't get digested or whatever, right? And then 16 would be the digestible energy of this 1 kilogram of cattle feed, right? And then so 16 is absorbed into the system, right? However, not all 16 are used for metabolism, right? Um, Part of it is lost in urine, right? And then so we say, let's say another 2 gets lost in urine. So 20 was the gross energy, 16 was the digestible energy, 4 gets lost in feces, and another 2 gets lost in the urine. So even though 16 gets absorbed, only 14 is now metabolizable energy, right? And then even the 14, right, out of that, it will be used for metabolic activity of the body, for breathing, gaseous loss. uh, I'm only talking about the major points, right? And then so you add all these other losses, and then you have a net energy, right? And then so these are the 4 levels, right? So lost by feces, gross energy minus what's lost in feces is digestible energy, and digestible energy gets absorbed, right, which is 16 in this example, and 2 gets lost in the urine, so metabolizable energy becomes 14. And then it's used for various activities, and you have net energy, right? So these are the four um, 4 levels of energy or whatever, right? So you need to read up on that. And right, so I'm just giving you basic knowledge necessary for this lecture, right? So but when we usually talk about, we refer to metabolizable energy for maintenance, metabolizable energy for growth, right? So if we look at adult animals, they don't have a component for growth or gaining, right? So they'll have metabolizable energy for maintenance, and they'll have metabolizable energy for things like lactation, right? Because for milk production also there will be energy, right? So the total metabolizable energy per day for these animals would be the addition of these two, 5.4 plus 1.7. Right, so this is the metabolizable energy requirement for calves of different weights gaining different body weights, daily body weight gain, right? So you need to ensure that the calf gets this daily requirement, right? But it gets more complicated with calves than with adult animals, right? Because this depends on the level of rumen digestive tract development, right? So initially immature, right? So let's say you have the same calf starter at 2 weeks. The let's say calf starter has 20 megajoules of gross energy, right? At 2 weeks, a smaller proportion, maybe 50-60% of that gross energy will get no, not 50-60, something less, huh? So I'm just giving numbers, right? Let's say out of the 20 megajoules of gross energy, only 8 gets absorbed, right? So metabolizable energy is 40% now, because only 8 got absorbed from the 20. But at 6 weeks, now the rumen is relatively development, the digestion process is more efficient. Now 12 megajoules get absorbed in contrast to the 8 that got absorbed 4 weeks ago, right? So now suddenly metabolizable energy is 60%, right? So similarly, uh, because the rumen and digestive tract development is not complete in calves, you can't give a fixed figure for calf starter saying, okay, this is the metabolizable energy for calf starter, right? You can't do that because calf rumen is not developed yet, is developing, right? So that makes this complicated. That makes this complicated, right? To do this calculation, because you don't know at this which age, different levels of absorption, metabolizable energy at different stages of development, right? So but if you have a rough idea, right? um, so uh, uh, I'll show you another graph, right? So generally we say, um, um, generally we say with a developed, well-developed rumen, right? With a well-developed rumen, which would be latter stage of pre-calf management towards weaning, about 12 to 14, right? So very close to weaning, right? Very close to weaning with proper rumen development. It can be somewhere around 12 to 14 megajoules per kilogram of dry matter, calf starter, right? So basically, if you have this 12 to 14, right, you can achieve this with 1 kilogram. See? With 1 kilogram, and then of course you are going to get from milk, right? So we usually say milk, so let's say these are 45 kilograms, and let's say this is a was a born at 30 kilograms, right? Let's say this animal was born at 30 kilograms, right? So it drinks 3 liters of milk a day, right? So we usually say the metabolizable energy of milk is about 2.5, 2.78, right? Usually we say 2.8, right? But for this calculation, let's say 3, right? So 3 liters of milk give um, about 9, maybe 8.5 megajoules of energy, right? Because the animal is getting 3 liters of milk a day, right? So 8.6, let's say. So 6 megajoules you have to provide with uh, concentrate or calf start, right? So milk gets him 8.6 megajoules of energy. The other 6 liters, I'm sorry, 6 megajoules you have to get from concentrate, right? And so if the animal is, maybe 3 weeks, animal is probably not getting this 12 megajoules from concentrate. Maybe it's getting 10 megajoules, right? So this is when it gets complicated, right? And then to get 10 megajoules, right, maybe calf needs to eat 400, 500 grams, right? Right, so that's how this calculation needs to be done. So we will do some calculations, and then this will become clearer to you, right? So right now, so this, let's say 30 kilogram animal, as soon as it's born, right? So let's say it's gaining weight at 200 grams per day. The requirement is 7.1, right? But by giving 3 liters, we are ensuring that it gets this, because each liter has 2.5 megajoules, for example. 2.5 times 3 liters is 7.5, right? So that's enough, right? But when if it's growing at 400 grams, right, per day, now higher body weight gain, now that 7.5 is not enough. Now you have to give calf starter, right? So if it's gaining even more, you have to give even more calf starter. Now you see the difference between, let's say, a poorly managed farm without calf starter. They have smaller calves because they don't get that extra energy to grow faster. Whereas a better managed farm, where they are given calf starter, they get that extra energy to gain better body weight, right? So let's say these with 3 liters, let's say you can get um, uh, 8 megajoules, right? And so this animal, 40 kilogram animal, only gaining 200 grams, because the animal gets only 0.5 from calf starter, right? Let's say 100 grams, right? And this animal is gaining 600 grams per day because it gets 8.5 from the milk and another additional 5 from calf start, right? So very simple. If you can give that 13.7, they will grow at 600 grams per day. If you can't give that, they will grow at a slower pace. So we call them runs or stunted animals or whatever. Nothing wrong with the animal. It's all to do with whether you can supply this or not, right? If you milk meant to supply only the maintenance. This you have to supplement with calf starter. Okay, right. Okay, so this is for up to 45 kilogram calves, right? But so this chart, next chart shows some additional ones, right? For so this is from a different source, right? For 80 kilogram, 140 kilogram, and 200 kilogram animals, right? I don't want to go into details of all of them. You can do that, right? But what I want to show here is see when they go from 80 to 140 to 200, right? The ME requirement goes down, right? See, um, protein requirement, crude protein requirement goes down, right? So look at this chart, right? And uh, see if you can understand. I'm sure you can understand. If you have any question, feel free to shoot them. Okay, so this is where we will maybe we'll do one more slide, right? So do these calculations, right, based on what we talked about, right, and we'll discuss them in class, right? Assume these are 30 kilogram calf, right? 30 kilograms at birth, right? So 30 kilograms at birth, which means you're giving 3 liters of milk, right? Do the calculation assuming taking that assumption. Okay, right. So remember, so I only talked about energy requirements. So just like energy, calf has requirements for crude protein, fiber, minerals, right? Vitamins also, right? So you'll ideally need to know all of those. This talks about in pounds and megacalories, so you need to convert them into kilograms and megajoules. Uh, so to be able to apply them to the Sri Lankan situation, right? So this is very important, right? So during entire calf pre-weaning period, right? Pre-weaning period, what is the total amount of calf starter eaten, right? Because a lot of people think, and this is going to cost me tens of thousands of rupees, right? I'm not going to give calf starter. But if you do the calculation, right, they won't eat a lot of calf starter throughout this period, right? So also try to calculate this manually. So for example, during the first week, no calf starter. During second week, they are eating about, let's say, 50 grams per day. During third week, they are eating 100 grams per day. During fourth week, maybe this 150, so on. So calculate this. So this must be the time point of weaning here, right? 8 week, week 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? So they are weaning on the 8th week, after the ninth week here, right? So add them up and see what they eat, right? And also refer to this, right? This is very important. Refer to this. They talk about something called NFC, which stands for non-fiber carbohydrates, right? So typically carb starter has about 50% non-fiber carbohydrates, right? So they talk about a magic number, which is your goal, right? So you need to make sure that a calf eats n number of kilos of non-fiber carbohydrates, right? So they've shown that if you can ensure that a calf eats this quantity of NFC, the calf will have a mature rumen. So read about that. So if n number of kilos of NFC would be 2n kilos of raw calf starter, right? Because NFC is 50% of dry matter basis from calf starter, right? So read this and give me the answer to this. Have the answer ready by next week. uh, right, so have the answer ready by the lecture discussion, right? So it's also important, guys, for you to remember that we talk about all these numbers, right? However, they are not set in stone, right? So there will be animals that go along our line. There will be animals that consume more than what we talk about, and there will be animals, whatever you try, they will not consume, our quantities, recommended quantities, right? So whatever you do, they will just not eat. This is where selection and culling comes into play, right? So those who don't perform, however much you try, should not be selected for, further growth and breeding, right? They will be poor producers. They will bring down your averages. They will be a burden to you. They will get sick. They will not give you enough milk. They will not come into heat on time. They are the troublemakers, right? So this is where culling needs to be practiced. So if you don't cull these animals, they will contribute to the next generation, genetics to the next generation, and then they will also be poor producers like this. So constant pain in the neck, right? So make sure you select only this group of animals, not this group, right? So your culling criterion might be the bottom one third, might be the bottom half, right? But at least the bottom 25% or one third you have to cull, right? Okay, guys, that is where we will stop today. We will so make sure you answer the questions before you come to the discussion, right? Thank you very much.